roller skating, we definitely would have these roller skate parties when I was growing up, middle school, high school, probably especially middle school. I wasn't a bad skater. I couldn't skate backwards. What I could not do is stop, right? And so we would have these, they weren't dances, obviously, but they were kind of these skate things where guys are at one end of the rink, girls are at the other. You're going to skate down and choose someone and skate around with them. And the girls learned that when Rob was coming their way, they would just move a little bit. I'd hit the wall, and then I would, start skating with one of them. I appreciated them moving in that way. They did not ask me to be a part of this video. I wonder how many of you know the name of Garrison Keillor. Some of it may be part generational, maybe not. Incredible storyteller. Back in the day, early in Sarah and Mai's marriage, I think it especially was those early years when we lived in Milwaukee, and we started having these long drives, Milwaukee to Nebraska, Nebraska back to Milwaukee. We'd take trips home from where we lived. We started listening to these cassettes. I wanted to listen to them again, and I got to find a cassette player in my house. Started listening to this wonderful storyteller who would primarily at that time focus his stories on this idyllic, this fictitious town that he called Lake Wobegon. Now, not only was he a great storyteller, and I tend to be kind of weepy anyway, probably more so now than then. There certainly were stories that made you laugh a whole lot, but there were some so poignant, they'd bring a tear to your eye. He also just had a way of kind of looking at life. He had a great take on life in general. And so here are just a couple of Garrison Keillor quotes. Here's a thought about parenting. The father of a daughter is nothing but a high-class hostage. A father turns a stony face to his sons, berates them, shakes his antlers, paws the ground, snorts, runs them off into the underbrush. But when his daughter puts her arm over his shoulder and says, "Daddy, I need to ask you something," he is a pat of butter in a hot frying pan. Or how about this related to life in general? I believe in looking reality straight in the eye and denying it. And then I love this. They say such nice things about people at their funerals, it makes me quite sad to realize I'm going to miss mine by a few days. Now, here's the main reason I started to think about Garrison Keillor over the last few weeks. Because of my title for today. With each story, he would sign off with the very same words, and the words he would end each story with were these. Well, that's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. As we begin, I want you to think about that final phrase today, above average. Knowing that all can't be above average, can they? A way to think, though, of that phrase as relates to our walk of faith. Because while it's obviously a very, very good thing when people come to Christ initially, and we give thanks for that, and I pray that's the case for all of you. While it's also a very, very good thing when people begin then to commit themselves to this experience, to Sunday morning worship, while those are obviously very, very good things, I wonder if you would agree with me here. If one's faith walk stops there and goes no further than that, then what can be produced by that life must be best described as what? Simply average at best. And knowing that's not where God wants any of us to end up, knowing that, here's the question. If we find ourselves caught in that, just caught in average as followers of Jesus, if we find ourselves there and perhaps because of our time together today, we begin to recognize that, then are we at least willing to try to move above that, beyond that, in our walk with Christ. For the past few weeks, we've been talking about what's required of us if we're going to be able to consistently take our ordinary lives, ordinary giftedness, ordinary passions. We've been talking about what it takes for us to give those kinds of things to God so that God might do what? So that God might use those ordinary things in extraordinary ways. And here today is yet another thing that's required of us. We've got to want something more than just an average faith. To explore that today, we're going to take a look at yet another person that we find in Scripture in the Old Testament, and his name is Jabez. And again, we turn to him simply to ask, well, what do we need to learn from him, God? What must we learn from his life today that we might be stronger? As we begin, let me lead you into just a couple of verses that we find in 1 Chronicles, and let me set these up a bit for you. Consider this. It's pretty cool when you read it. So when you get home, read through the first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles. In the first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles, we find over 600 names. And right smack dab in the middle of those names, one person is singled out. And here's how Jabez is singled out with these words initially. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. Isn't that great? And our question is, well, what is it that made God see him as more honorable? Or what is it that made God see him really as above average, at least compared to his brothers in the first place? Here's our core passage, 1 Chronicles 4, 9 and 10. Here's what we read there. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, saying, Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory, and let your hand be with me, and keep me from harm, so that I would be free from pain. And it says, God granted his request. Now, in just these 2 verses, we learn 3 very important things related to Jabez's mentality when it comes to embracing life. So what we want to do today is this. We want to take a look at these 3 things we find here so that we might better be able to, again, live above average lives. That being our goal, consider these 3 things we learned from Jabez today. The first being this. First, if we want to have an above average faith, live above average lives, first we've got to have within us great ambition when it comes to how we approach our walk with God. We've got to have great ambition when it comes to how we approach our walk with God. Think about this for a moment. While Jabez's brothers, more than likely, when we think about how our passage is worded, while Jabez's brothers more than likely were satisfied with being average, here is Jabez sticking his neck out in order to say to God, definitively, God, I want more than that. And he says that primarily just through these 3 words, enlarge my territory. Say that with me. Enlarge my territory. What he means by that is simply this. God, expand my vision when it comes to what you want to do through me. God, deepen my dreams when it comes to how I might serve you. Ultimately, God, draw me into something that is far above just average. You know, while I think it's fair to say most people don't embrace life like that, I also think it's fair to say that most of us would love to embrace life like that. So why don't we? Well, I think a couple of things often get in our way. The first being fear. And what's at the root of that fear is this. What if I dream really big and then I can't deliver? Or what if I bring some really big ambitions to God and then I'm not able to follow through with any of that? Guys, think about the things you want to accomplish in this life as a follower of Jesus. What do you most want to do as a Christ follower? Think about those things. And then if you're not turning them into some concrete daily goals right now, is it fear, especially fear of failure? Is that something that's a part of what's getting in your way right now? Or here's another thing that often gets in our way when it comes to us having great ambitions: complacency. What is complacency? It's a nice way to say this: we're often lazy when it comes to our walk of faith. Several years ago, I served on our conference board of ordained ministry. Our task as a board was this: we were working with people as they were coming forward, moving toward ordination in the United Methodist Church here in Florida. Our ordination process is a bit unique because it has two steps connected to it. Meaning you're first ordained as a provisional elder, sort of this probationary period. And then only as you progress in your ministry, skills, knowledge, preaching, clarity of call, only when you set your sights higher and then you work toward that higher place, or only then can you be ordained as a full elder. To help them with that, we as a board would give them what we called contingencies. They were things they needed to work on and work through before they came back to us. And all of those contingencies, all of them had one thing in common: to help those we had assigned them to help them be stretched by this work, because we knew that that's what it was going to take if they were going to be able to really reach their full potential. Guys, I share that because it's the very same with us each and every day. Meaning we too are called by God to reach our full potential. But that's not going to happen unless we also are stretched by what we're taking on in this life. Ask yourself first today, what do you want to accomplish as a disciple? In other words, what is your ambition? And even more importantly, is it big enough? Really think about that and struggle with that this week. Secondly, we learned this from Jabez, that if we want to live above average lives, then we've also got to be constantly growing in our faith, to consistently be striving to grow as a follower of Jesus. One of the things I love about our theology as United Methodists, and that simply means our understanding of who God is and who we are to be in relationship to God. One of the things I love about our Wesleyan theology is how we understand grace. And here's how that connects to what we're talking about. Guys, most churches talk about grace only in terms of salvation. They focus on the forgiveness of God that comes through Jesus' death, and that's the only grace that they focus upon. Guys, as important as that grace is, that form of grace, and it is primarily our focus, thank goodness as United Methodists, though, when it comes to God's grace, we don't stop there. And we never stop there for this reason, because we believe once someone has been saved by grace, then God now makes available to them what we call sanctifying grace. And what is sanctifying grace? It is that grace that helps them now grow spiritually every single day until the day they die. In other words, this is the stage of grace where we truly do say to God, God, now that I have received salvation, please continue to work your grace in me in ways that really do move me beyond just an ordinary life, just an ordinary faith. Guys, while it is so easy for so many people, you know this, we run into this, we see others embrace it. While it is easy for so many people once they've received God's grace in Jesus to just kind of kick back and say, I got mine, I'm good to go. know that that's never what God hopes for us. So ask yourself, secondly, today, honestly, what are you doing right now in order to truly grow in your faith? And if, as you ask that question, your honest answer is not much, then what are you willing to do about that as we journey together here at Beamer? And then there's a final thing we learn from Jabez, that lastly, if we want to live above average lives, lastly, we're going to need this: a genuine and committed and very, very strong prayer life. Notice the amazing example that Jabez sets for us here, meaning in the midst of his praying, he makes 3 requests of God, and it's important for us to notice these very specifically because these have got to be a big part of our prayer lives as well. For example, first notice that Jabez prays for this, for God's power in his life, and he does that with these words: Lord, bless me. Now, when we read those words, when we hear those words, we might think initially, man, how self-centered is that? Bless me, God. But here's all Jabez is saying to God in that moment. He's saying, God, as I take on what you've given me to do, God-centered, other-centered, God, as I take on what you've given me to do, empower me as only you can. And why does he say that to God so openly? Because he knows he can only be successful with what God has given him to do if God does bless him, if God does empower him. Having prayed for God's power, notice secondly, Jabez then prays for this, for God's presence in his life. And we see that through these words: let your hand be with me. Here's what Jabez understands completely, that with great power comes what? Great responsibility. And he knows that the only one who can help him be responsible with the kind of amazing power God has given him, the only one who could ever help him be responsible with that kind of power is the one who can give that kind of power, God himself. And so having asked for the power, he now prays, God, help me in this way. Help me as I use what you've given me. And then lastly, having prayed for God's power, prayed for God's presence in guiding him to use what God has given him. And remember, these are things that must be a part of our prayer lives as well. Lastly, he then prays for this, for God's protection, for God's help in time of need. And he prays this lastly because he knows what we've always got to remember. This is not a negative thought. It's just a real ministry kind of thought. He knows that at times, doing the right thing, trying to do good in a world that is suffering and at times bitter, he knows he needs to lastly pray for God's protection because at times doing the right thing will bring with it some struggles, some negatives. Early on in our time together, we said this, that it's obviously a very good thing when people commit their lives to Christ. It's also obviously a very good thing when people commit themselves at the very least to this, Sunday morning worship. But remember, we also said this, if our faith stops there, then what's produced is going to be quite an average life. And my challenge for you today is this, man, don't settle for average. To help you with that, and I hope this helps, here again are some questions that I hope you'll spend some time with this week. You're going to find these on your insert. 1, what do you want to accomplish as a disciple? I bet some of you have never asked yourself that question in just that way. Trust me, as a follower of Jesus, you are called to accomplish something for him in his name. So at least begin to think about that. What are you wanting to accomplish as a disciple? In other words, what is your great ambition? And honestly, is it great enough? Is it big enough? Second question, what are you doing right now in order to grow your faith? To not plateau and say, I'm in good shape, but to say every day, God, make me stronger. Make me more full of your love and grace. What are you doing right now in order to grow your faith? And if your answer is not much, then what might you begin to do? And then lastly, what are the requests that you are bringing to God in prayer? And do they consistently match the example that Jabez offers to us?